Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Crime Calls podcast, where crime is only one call away. Today I'm joined by my lovely guest. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Hafsa. Hello.
Today's case that I'll be covering will be the case of Jack Unterweger, the serial killer Golden Boy. It's a very exciting case. I only found out about it recently. This case is a 4-parter case, so prepare yourselves. This is part 1 of 4. In this episode, we will be going over the early life of Jack Unterweger. Before getting into the case, I'm going to state the trigger warnings for this episode, as there are quite a few. The trigger warnings for this episode are mentions of violence, assault of women, child abuse, and death. Now let's get into the story. Johan Unterweger is now famously known as Jack Unterweger, and throughout the whole story, I'll be referring to him as Jack and not Johan. Jack was born on August 16th, 1950, in the town of Judenberg in Styria, Austria, to his mother, Theresia Unterweger, who was a Viennese barmaid and waitress. However, many also believe that she was a sex worker, because it was very common for women to do that work at that time. And his father, Jack Becker, who was an American soldier who his mother met in Trieste, Italy. There's a lot of names here that I'm not going to be able to pronounce, so just bear with me. But I might put a little clip of, Google saying it correctly, so then the people aren't confused. Jack Unterweger never knew his birth father. All he knew was that his father was an American GI serving with Allied forces, which occupied the country for 10 years after the Second World War. While Jack's mother, Theresia, was pregnant with him, she got arrested for fraud, but was released before her son's birth. Kind of a girl boss, I must say.
It's fraud.
It's fraud, but she didn't kill anyone.
We don't condone.
No, we don't condone crime and violence. But just kind of a girl boss. While she was pregnant, she managed to get herself arrested. I mean, it's kind of iconic, if you ask me. I mean, she was really living the criminal life while pregnant. She didn't care. However, when little Jack was 2 years old in 1953, his mother was again arrested for fraud. And she sent little Jack to live with his grandfather, who was really not a good person. He was usually a grandfather. It's really nice, comforting, you love going around to their house, being with your grandparents. However, Jack's grandfather was really not a good person. He was an alcoholic who would regularly beat Jack and would engage in sex with different prostitutes in the same bed where Jack would be supposedly sleeping inches away. However, little Jack was not sleeping throughout this.
Yeah, I think
it's obvious that he would not be sleeping through this. It's quite something. And many predict this is where his hatred for prostitutes and women came from, because he grew up with his grandfather, doing these type of activities, and it was not a nice place to be in, and many predict that he just started hating women from this point onwards. And he also didn't like his mother for abandoning him because she was in and out of prison, and
for being an absolute girl boss.
Yeah, for being an absolute girl boss and being done for fraud while she was pregnant. Once again, do not condone crime on this podcast. Stay out of jail, please. His auntie was also a prostitute who he lived with at one point. But she was unfortunately murdered by one of her clients. And this childhood trauma provoked Jack Unterweger's hatred for prostitutes and women, which would later wreak havoc in multiple countries. In his youth, he also started following in the steps of his family members, and Jack started drinking alcohol at a very young age and adopted a similar lifestyle as his grandfather. And because his grandfather was an alcoholic, he started introducing Jack to alcohol at a very young age. So now we're going to get into his first murder conviction, the murder of Margaret Schaefer. Once again, I don't know how to pronounce the names properly because they're Austrian, pretty sure German, Czech, So, yeah, no way I'm going to be able to pronounce these properly. But I'll put in Google saying them correctly, so then the people know. This is how you say her name correctly according to Google.
Margaret Schäfer.
Okay, throughout Jack's youth, he was in and out of prison for petty crimes and assaults against local prostitutes. So he is very much following in the steps of his grandfather, and he's very much showing his hatred for women at this point. Do not stan. Do not.
We don't stand.
We do not stan violence against women and anyone on this podcast. Between 1966 and 1975, Jack was convicted 16 times, which were mostly for sexual assault, and spent most of those 9 years in prison. However, 1974 was the year when Jack Unterweger committed his first murder, which was the murder of an 18-year-old prostitute, Margaret Schäfer, who he sexually assaulted, and then he strangled Margaret with her bra and dumped her in the woods. However, Jack Unterweger would be caught in 1976 by authorities and sent to prison, where he was sentenced to life in prison. But the big question is, will he be staying there for long?
Was he never given like the death penalty or anything? Like, 'cause back then I swear they had the death
I think
penalty.
like stuff with the death penalty wasn't really common back then, so like they just sentenced him to life in prison. So yeah, this is where I'm going to end the first episode. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to tune in to part 2 of the story. Come back in the second episode to find out about Jack Unterweger's first prison sentence.